Over the last few weeks, the world has been fixated on the war in the Middle East. But while the United States burns through its military stockpiles fighting Iran, China is quietly executing its most significant strategic move in decades. On the 15th of March, following an unprecedented 16-day military silence, the PLA surged 26 aircraft and 7 naval vessels around Taiwan. With the global economy dependent on Taiwanese semiconductors, this escalation threatens a $10 trillion economic collapse. Today, we crack open the strategic plumbing of the US-China rivalry, explain how the Iran war is structurally bankrupting America's defense supply chain, and reveal why Chinese rare earth export restrictions are a ticking time bomb for the Western world. My name is Nick, and you're watching Coin Bureau Finance. To put this macroeconomic shock into context, we first have to look at the illusion of the American pivot to Asia. For the last decade, US politicians have been patting themselves on the back for successfully building a coalition to contain China within the First Island chain. Now, the First Island chain is geography transformed into strategy, forming a natural barrier of archipelagos from Japan down to the Philippines that constrains Chinese naval power to coastal waters. For the United States, this chain constitutes the forward edge of a defensive perimeter designed to protect global trade choke points. And the political narrative was that as long as the United States maintained a massive stockpile of precision munitions and advanced air defense systems in the Pacific, Taiwan's so-called Silicon Shield would remain impenetrable. But the structural reality was that the United States simply assumed it would never have to fight 2 major high-intensity wars at the exact same time. Instead of building a robust defensive industrial base capable of sustaining a protracted conflict, they relied on just-in-time manufacturing, a model that prioritized short-term budget cuts over long-term strategic thinking. And the moment the United States and Israel launched joint strikes on Iran on the 28th of February 2026, that entire Pacific deterrence strategy began to unravel. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. The United States military is the most well-funded institution on Earth and can easily handle a regional conflict in the Middle East without abandoning its commitments to Asia. But there's a catch. That assumption is a complete mirage based on outdated Cold War production metrics. In just the first 12 days of Operation Epic Fury, the United States struck more than 5,000 targets in Iran, and the financial cost of this campaign is absolutely staggering. During a closed-door briefing on Capitol Hill, Pentagon officials admitted that the first 6 days of the war alone cost at least $11.3 billion. They were burning through roughly $2 billion per day in munitions during the opening salvo. But the real crisis isn't the money. It's the physical depletion of the actual weapons. In just 72 hours, the US Navy fired 400 Tomahawk land attack missiles. This is 10% of the entire US inventory wiped out in a single weekend. And because the United States currently only produces about 90 to 100 Tomahawks per year, they literally just burn through 4 years of production capacity in 3 days. And for fiscal year 2026, the Pentagon had planned to acquire just 57 additional missiles, a figure that would replace only a fraction of those already fired. And this, of course, begs the question, how on earth is the Pentagon going to deter a Chinese invasion of Taiwan when the missile racks in the Pacific are sitting empty? Which brings us to the actual mechanics of how modern air defense works and why the Iran war is so devastating to the global balance of power. In plain English, high-tech warfare against ballistic missiles requires high-tech interceptors. When Iran launched over 500 ballistic missiles and 2,000 drones in retaliation for the US and Israeli strikes, the US was forced to rely on its most advanced defense shields, namely the Patriot and the THAAD missile defense systems. Think of a THAAD battery like having a multi-billion-dollar force shield that can shoot down incoming threats from the edge of space. And the radar on these systems is so incredibly powerful that when stationed in South Korea, it can peer almost 3,000 kilometers deep into Chinese territory. It is the ultimate strategic deterrent against Beijing. But when an Iranian strike managed to destroy a key THAAD radar component in Jordan, the US military was forced to make a desperate choice. On the 10th of March 2026, the US Army officially began moving parts of its THAAD anti-missile system alongside Patriot batteries out of South Korea and into the Middle East. They literally stripped the Pacific of its most critical defense shield in the dead of night to fight a new war in the Gulf. And this is where the brutal maths of interception production comes into play. The United States fired roughly 150 THAAD interceptors during Iran's barrages back in 2025, which wiped out 25% of the entire US stockpile before this current war even started. And because Lockheed Martin only delivered 11 of these interceptors in 2024, it will take anywhere from 3 to 8 years just to replenish what was already fired. As Senator Mark Kelly bluntly put it during a recent hearing, the maths on this, it just doesn't work. You cannot continually shoot down $30,000 Iranian drones with $12 million interceptors that take half a decade to build. And this intense depletion has set off a chain reaction that is about to hit the Indo-Pacific with a devastating wave of vulnerability. We are already seeing the physical evidence of this strategic gap playing out in the Taiwan Strait. From the 27th of February to the 13th of March, Taiwan recorded an eerie 16-day lull where Chinese military aircraft completely vanished from their air defense identification zone. Pundits called it a diplomatic goodwill gesture ahead of the planned upcoming summit between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping. They're wrong. It was an operational staging period. The moment the US confirmed the THAAD redeployment from South Korea, China instantly reversed course. On the 14th and 15th of March, 26 PLA aircraft and 7 naval vessels surged around Taiwan, with 16 aircraft penetrating the air defense zone. This wasn't a random patrol. It was Beijing testing the newly created defensive gap in real time. And they're doing this while Taiwan's own domestic defense preparations are completely paralyzed by political gridlock. Taiwanese President Lai Ching-te proposed a massive $40 billion special defense budget back in November to build an integrated air and missile defense network called Taiwan Dome. But that budget is currently stalled in the opposition-controlled legislature, leaving the island dangerously exposed just as American resources are being pulled away. But before we go deeper into how China is weaponizing the global supply chain to crush American manufacturing, smash that like button if you're enjoying this video so far, and subscribe to the channel and ping that notification bell. And while you're down there, why not check out our free weekly newsletter? In global defense supply chains fracture like this, the economic fallout hits the markets and your wallet faster than you can ever possibly predict. Our newsletter breaks down the complex geopolitical and financial data that the mainstream media completely misses. We give you the actionable insight you need to understand how these macro shocks will actually impact your portfolio and your purchasing power. Just click the link in the description or scan this QR code on your screen. Now, back to the US-China strategic chess match. And this is where things get truly interesting. To quickly recap, the United States is burning through years of missile production in a matter of days in the Middle East, while simultaneously moving its Pacific air defenses to the Gulf. But the most terrifying contagion mechanism of all is how these weapons are actually built. Every single Patriot missile, THAAD interceptor, and F-35 fighter jet requires massive amounts of rare earth elements. Because rare earth materials can store large amounts of magnetic energy, they are used to build the permanent magnets that guide precision munitions to their targets. A single F-35 requires more than 900 pounds of rare earth elements. A Virginia-class submarine needs 9,200 pounds. And China controls nearly 90% of global rare earth refining capacity, alongside 94% of the world's rare earth magnet manufacturing. Think of the defense industrial base like a massive, highly advanced automobile factory. The United States has the blueprints, the engineers, and the assembly lines, but China has the only factory in the world that makes the engine block. And if China decides to stop shipping engine blocks, the entire American assembly line grinds to a catastrophic halt. And this isn't fear-mongering. In October 2025, China dropped the hammer. Beijing implemented the strictest rare earth export controls to date, explicitly applying the foreign direct product rule to rare earth elements. In plain English, they made it illegal for any company anywhere in the world to use Chinese processed rare earths for foreign military purposes. They literally took America's favorite economic weapon, the export control list, and turned it against the Pentagon. And the economic logic here is brutally simple. The US military burns through its interceptor stockpile in Iran, which forces defense contractors to ramp up production, which requires a massive influx of rare earth magnets, which China legally blocks from being exported. It is a perfect, self-fulfilling doom loop, and we're already seeing the panic in the financial markets. Shares of MP Materials, the only primary rare earth miner in the United States, have surged 118% in the last year. Wall Street is pricing in a rare earth supply chain crisis in real time. But building domestic processing capacity takes years, if not decades. The Pentagon recently invested over $400 million into MP Materials to build a domestic magnet supply chain. But even when fully operational, that facility will only produce about 1,000 tons of magnets a year. Meanwhile, China produces over 300,000 tons annually. The scale of the dependency is mathematically insurmountable in the short term. And this means that the United States is fighting a war in the Middle East with weapons it cannot replace without the permission of the very country it is preparing to fight in the Pacific. And because the global market is interconnected, this vulnerability bleeds directly into the energy sector. The mainstream narrative is that China is terrified of the Iran war because it imports massive volumes of Gulf oil through the Strait of Hormuz. Pundits argue that the closure of the strait is a devastating blow to the Chinese economy because half of their oil imports transit that waterway. But the truth is that China has spent the last year preparing for exactly this scenario. Throughout 2025, while oil prices were hovering around $60 a barrel, China aggressively hoarded crude. They built up an estimated 1.3 billion barrels of onshore storage, and that is enough to cover 4 months of imports, even if the Strait of Hormuz remains completely sealed. Furthermore, Iran has specifically allowed Chinese vessels to pass the blockade, turning China's reliance on sanctioned oil into an exclusive geopolitical VIP pass. And China has spent the last decade building overland pipelines from Russia while simultaneously pushing a massive electric vehicle transition that has already displaced over 1 million barrels per day of oil demand. So, while European and American supply chains are paralyzed by the shipping reroutes and skyrocketing freight rates, China sits comfortably on a mountain of strategic reserves. They look at the chaos in the Middle East and say, if the Americans want to drain their treasury and their arsenals fighting in the desert, then let them. And this brings us to the big question. How on earth is the United States government going to handle a massive structural defense deficit when their entire strategic framework assumes they have time to rebuild? In July 2023, Apple CEO Tim Cook and other tech executives attended a classified CIA briefing in Silicon Valley. During that meeting, CIA Director William Burns reportedly warned that Xi Jinping has instructed the Chinese military to be ready to conduct a successful invasion of Taiwan by the year 2027. And the Chinese government just backed that timeline up with cold, hard cash. During the National Party's Congress in March 2026, Beijing announced a 7% increase in its defense budget, bringing it to a staggering $277 billion. And the Pentagon has warned that China's actual military expenditures could be up to 90% higher than the reported figures due to hidden research and development costs. This massive influx of capital comes right on the heels of a sweeping anti-corruption campaign that has purged over 100 senior PLA leaders since 2022. Beijing is effectively accelerating its military modernization and restructuring its command hierarchy while its domestic economy slows down. And this puts the United States in a tight spot. If the US continues to pour Patriot missiles, THAAD batteries, and Tomahawks into the Middle East to contain Iran, they will completely strip the Pacific of its deterrence capabilities. This would mathematically guarantee that the US runs out of precision munitions within the first 25 days of a hypothetical conflict over Taiwan, exactly as a recent Heritage Foundation study warned. On the other hand, if the US stops defending its assets in the Middle East and pivots all remaining weapons to Asia, they risk letting the Iran conflict spiral into a regional conflagration that chokes off global energy supplies and triggers massive inflation. There is no policy maneuver that fixes a structurally depleted industrial base overnight, and the financial markets are screaming that a reckoning is coming. The S&P 500 is down 2.1% year to date, while defense stocks like L3Harris and Lockheed Martin have surged anywhere from 29% to 72% in the past year. Gold is up 68%. The VIX Volatility Index recently spiked to a terrifying 60.13. Investors are fleeing Chinese internet and large-cap ETFs at a record pace, with the KWEB Internet Fund down over 13% this year alone. And, most alarmingly, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, the absolute bedrock of the global AI boom, has seen its stock pull back over 6% in just the last month. TSMC manufactures over 90% of the world's most advanced chips, and companies like Apple and Nvidia have absolutely no viable alternative foundry for their hardware. Taiwan has historically relied on this so-called silicon shield to deter Chinese aggression, operating under the assumption that a destroyed semiconductor industry would harm China just as much as the West. TSMC even has a contingency plan to remotely disable its manufacturing equipment if the island is captured. But if China moves to secure the first island chain and blockades Taiwan, the resulting supply chain collapse would be catastrophic regardless of who controls the factories. Bloomberg Economics estimates that the global economy would suffer a $10 trillion contraction. That is a 10% wipeout of global GDP, which is an economic shock far worse than the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is the exact backdrop for the highly anticipated summit between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping, which was originally scheduled for March but has been postponed. Top US and Chinese economic officials, including Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, recently convened in Paris to map out deliverables for this historic meeting. They discussed technical proposals like a US-China Board of Trade aimed at balancing economic growth without compromising national security. But the diplomatic reality is that Trump's negotiating position has been severely weakened by the military aggression in Iran. In fact, just before the summit was postponed, Trump threatened to delay the summit entirely if Beijing doesn't help secure the Strait of Hormuz, stressing China's influence over the region. But China is walking into that negotiation room with a record-breaking export growth of 21.8% in early 2026 and a massive $213 billion trade surplus. And they are achieving this despite plunging into a fourth year of deflation, a collapse in real estate sector, and youth unemployment sitting at 16.3%. President Trump's renewed tariffs barely slowed China's industrial momentum, as Chinese manufacturers simply redirected their exports to Southeast Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The United States is walking in with a depleted arsenal, a fractured alliance network, and a structural dependency on Chinese rare earths. So, the 16-day military lull around Taiwan wasn't a peace offering. It was a demonstration of control. Beijing showed Washington that they can turn the pressure on and off at will, treating the Taiwan Strait like a faucet while the US scrambles to plug leaks in the Middle East. The transition from a unipolar world to a multipolar reality was always going to be a highly fragile gamble. By weaponizing rare earth export controls and capitalizing on America's two-front overextension, China has shattered the illusion of US strategic supremacy once and for all. The United States is now entirely exposed to the brutal, unforgiving realities of industrial warfare. They are bidding for survival against a manufacturing giant that produces ships and missiles at a fraction of the cost and 10 times the speed. And the resulting geopolitical shockwave will force the American government to choose between saving its influence in the Middle East or saving its hegemony in the Pacific. There are no easy solutions left, only incredibly painful trade-offs. We may soon find out which ones have been chosen for us. But what do you think? Do you reckon the United States' defense industrial base can adapt and rebuild its stockpiles in time to deter a move on Taiwan? Or are we watching the permanent, irreversible shift of global power toward Beijing? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you want to understand exactly how the Strait of Hormuz closure can impact the global energy market, then you can watch our video on that right over here. That's all from me today. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you again soon.